Hey everybody, welcome to chapter 6 is Excel problem. This one's again pretty beefy and pretty difficult, but that's why we're going to work through it together, and hopefully we learn a few things about interest rates along the way. So, all right, so let's just take a look at, let's see, our first one here wants us to find the yield for each of these two investments. And we have, let's see, a 12-year treasury bond and a 7-year corporate bond. It's just occurring to me that this starts with B. I don't know where A is. Maybe I feel like I'm making a mistake or something. But anyway, all right. So let's just take a look at it. So to find the yield on our bond, we're going to start with our risk-free rate, which is actually given to us right here. So I'm just going to say this equals the risk-free rate. And then we're going to figure out our inflation premium. And to do that, what we have to do is kind of multiply our expected inflation by the number of years we expect that inflation. So in this case, for a 12-year bond, I'm going to go ahead and type in, if it will let me. Sometimes this thing freezes up cells. But we have 2 years. So this is a 12-year bond. So we're going to expect 2 years of the 3%, and then 4 years at the 4%, which makes 6 years, and then 6 years, nope, it won't let me, but 6 years at the 5%. And so what we have to do then is say the inflation premium is going to equal our expected inflation times the number of years at that inflation. You'll see I put that in parentheses, and then I'll say plus this expected inflation rate times the number of years, plus, and I'm going to say this expected inflation rate times, but it won't let me, I couldn't type 6 in there, but we're going to have 6 more years of that, right? So that adds up to 12 years. 2 years at 3%, 4 years at 4%, and 6 years at 5%. And then I have to divide all of that. So I'm actually going to have to put another set of parentheses all the way around this. So divide all of that by the number of years, which for this is 12 years. So there's my inflation premium. So based on our estimates of inflation in the period, we're going to add a premium for this 12-year treasury bond. All right. Now we have a maturity risk premium where we're going to take just, you'll notice that it tells us right here, it's 0.01% times t minus 1, where t is the amount of time. And so that should be, this should equal 0.01 times C10, which is the number of years, 12 in this case, minus 1. That will give us our maturity risk premium. And then to find our total 12-year treasury yield, we're just going to take the sum. So we're going to add these 3 up. There we go. So our 12-year, our 12-year treasury bond, we're looking at a yield of 7.443. We're going to do the same thing for our 7-year corporate bond. So again, our real risk-free rate is still this up here, minus 3%. For our inflation premium, again, so this one's only 7 years. So this one will have 2 years at 3%, 4 years at 4%, and then only 1 year at 5%, right? So say this equals, and this time I'm just going to do my double open, and then I'll say 3% times 2 years plus 4% times 4 years plus 5%. I can put times 1, but times 1 is the same as if I had just done that, right? Times 1 year, close that parenthesis all the way around it, and then divide it by the number of years, which is, in this case, 7. So there's our inflation premium, our maturity risk premium. This will equal, again, the maturity risk premium times t minus 1. So t is the time, so I'm going to do 7 minus 1. All right, with a corporate bond, we have a liquidity premium, which is just set here. So this is going to be 2%, gives it to us right here. And then we have a default risk premium, like the likelihood that it could fail, or I guess what we want to factor in as a premium for the chance that it could fail and we could lose our money that whenever we invest in a bond, we're loaning our money. So on a treasury bond, we're loaning it to the US Treasury, and on a corporate bond, we're loaning it to a corporation. So you can see that our default risk is going to be based on this little table here. So this is AA rated. So this is you can see that it's the default risk premium plus the liquidity premium. Since we've already factored in the liquidity premium here, we're going to say that this equals the AA rate minus the liquidity premium, because we don't want to add that in twice. Oops, I didn't have to put that close parenthesis. Okay, and now to find our total corporate yield, we're just going to take the sum of all those. Okay, so you can see these are pretty darn close. But it also, what it means is, if I'm going to need a slightly better return on this 7-year corporate bond to make it worth the risk, the default liquidity risks that I would get on the treasury bond, even though there's less inflation risk because this is shorter term. Okay, so this is how we evaluate like bond investment opportunities, is we kind of factor these in and see which one we think is a better deal for us. And so in this case, it looks like the 7-year corporate bond is slightly better for us. Okay. All right, so let's construct a graph for our yield curve. So unfortunately, when we do this, it's not going to look perfectly the way it does, because the one they have there in the problem is more stretched out and flattened, but it really is pretty simple. We're just going to highlight our data set here. Let's see, we'll try inserting a chart. Try to look. So that looks roughly like it. The one that's in the book is like more stretched out and flat, closer to that. And so it won't always match up perfectly, but as you look at the options, you'll see only one of them has this kind of big spike here at a 20-year maturity, and then a decline to the 30-year maturity. Okay, so again, when we create things in Excel, sometimes we have to stretch or skew them a little bit if we're trying to match them up to something else. But that's roughly what it looks like. But you can see when I have it normal size, it's even a little bit funkier looking than the one you'll see in your options. All right, so let's look at section D. We will calculate yields and then construct a new yield curve graph. Let's see, that shows both the treasury and the corporate bonds. Okay, so it gives us our treasury yields, and then it wants us to find our AA corporate yield. So we're going to do this. In essence, we know that, let's see, what do we know here? we know that our treasury yield is really only different from our corporate yield by this default premium and liquidity premium if our maturities were the same. So when we look at the difference between these two, we have the difference in the inflation premium and maturity risk premium, which were based on the fact that this is a 7-year bond and this was a 12-year bond. Okay, but the liquidity premium and the default risk premium, those were based on the fact that this is a corporate bond and that is a treasury bond. Corporate bonds are higher risk. Okay, so really these two things account for the only difference in the yield. Okay, so really all we're going to do is we're just going to say that the treasury yield, or the corporate yield, equals the treasury yield plus the liquidity premium plus the default risk premium for the same number of years. That's it. So now I can just fill this down if I want to, but I have to be careful because I want it to fill this, but I want it to leave those two, the premiums on the same cell. So I'm going to put dollar signs on either side of C for C29 and either side of the C for C30, which says lock your calculations on those two cells, but allow this cell to move with the fill button. So now as I grab the fill button and pull it down, we can see that it's left C29 and C30 in each of these, but it's calculated using this amount as it moves down. Okay, and so, you know, in essence, what we find is that there's always this spread between the two of that equals the difference because of the total of the liquidity premium and the default risk premium. These blue ones we don't really need, so I'm not going to worry about showing you how. There's enough new stuff to learn here without doing that. And then here it wants us to, what does it want us to do? To graph, to do a new yield curve graph that shows both the treasury and the corporate bonds. Okay, so all we're going to really do is do a graph that compares those two. So that's pretty easy. So let's see what we can do. We'll do treasury yield and corporate yield. I'll come up to insert. I'll choose one of these ones that has two lines. See, look, they track each other pretty much perfectly, just with the treasury yield being what, 0.54% higher based on those premiums, and that's it. And then F, I was looking at F, it's kind of some crazy math that I think is beyond our scope. So I'm going to tell you to just like enter zeros for F when you do this, and then I'll go in and correct your score so that these won't count against you. There's no way for me to remove that specific question off of the homework, but it's not worth the time for something that honestly you're not ever going to use unless you go into a very, very specific part of like finance. Not very, very specific, but more specifically into finance. And so, you know, you're going to learn a lot more math between now and then. Mostly, I think what we really want you to learn here is A, like to be more comfortable again with how these Excel formulas work, but B, recognize that all things being equal, treasury bonds are going to yield less than corporate bonds, and that's because treasury bonds are lower risk. Okay, and that when we are evaluating bonds, we have we start with this real risk-free rate, and then these premiums based on inflation and maturity risk really just depend on the life of the bond. So a 12-year bond versus a 7-year bond. And then the liquidity and default premiums are based on the type of bond it is. The higher the risk bond, right? The lower the rating on the bond, the higher that default risk is going to be. So hopefully, if you kind of understand those two concepts, you're understanding plenty for what we need to learn in this chapter. And like I said, once you submit it, I'll go ahead and give you full credit for F. If you want to try F, you go for it. And if you get any of it right, I'll give it to you as extra credit. All right. I hope you have a great week. And I hope that you're getting something out of all of this crazy Excel work.